Good morning to everyone. Hope everyone had a restful night. I'm going to talk about two true stories today. And by the time they're over, you'll get the idea of what it's about. First one is about a man who used to attend the 7:30 a.m. worship service on Sunday morning at our parish. And he always sat in the very back of the church called the vestibule area. And he would sit on the lower steps. There's not really many chairs back there, so people would stand. And so he would sit on the steps leading up to the choir loft. And not long after the service started, his head would droop and he would begin to snore. The ushers, as well as others who were back there, began shaking their heads in disgrace. And more than once I overheard comments concerning how the man's lack of reverence and his behavior were inappropriate. And I can understand that, 'cause there was a part of me that thought, gosh, why would you come into church and fall asleep? Well, later on I found out what others didn't know was that the man worked a series of phosphate mines in the south side of our town. And on weekends, since he didn't have a family, he volunteered to work double shifts Saturday. So he would work all day Saturday and all day Saturday night. He would do this so that people with families could spend the weekend with their loved ones. So that's why he was so tired for working a double shift, so others could spend time with their family. And despite doing that, instead of going home, which is what most people would do, and going to bed because you're so tired, he felt it was important enough on a Sunday to come into church. I'm sure he didn't mean to fall asleep, but what are you going to do when you're up 24 hours or more? So what did I learn from this? Self-sacrifice, putting others before himself, and the way we judge others in situations. We always tend to think something negative instead of just saying, thinking to ourselves something positive, and leave it at that. Second story involves early morning service. Monday through Friday, they would have an early morning service at our church, 7 a.m. A lot of people before they start their workday would go, and there was about 15 of us who would show up all the time. And we knew each other, knew who everybody was. Well, one day this lady comes in. She sits about midway toward the back. And right in the most important part of the service, her cell phone rings. She wasn't one of the regular people that go there. But her cell phone rings. And to everyone's amazement, instead of just turning it off, she gets out of the pew, answers it, and starts talking as she's walking toward the back of the church. And again, everybody was in disgrace and in disbelief that somebody would be so irreverent to do that. Well, what other people didn't know about this particular lady, the cell phone going off was disruptive. And the priest actually preached about it the next Sunday, about the worldliness of having cell phone in a church or what have you. And that's just the way things go usually. But what others didn't know about this particular lady is that she had a teenage daughter who was attending one of the local colleges. And over the weekend, she had been involved in a serious car crash. And the mother flew in, had spent the weekend with her up at the hospital. She was up in the ICU. And when it looked like she was doing better, the doctor told her to go to her hotel and get some rest, and they would call her if there were any changes. So instead of going to her hotel, she goes to church at 7 a.m. And instead of finding the compassion and gaze of love that we should give somebody, she gets almost sneered at for answering her phone. Well, as it would turn out, the phone call was from the ICU. Turned out her daughter had taken a sudden turn for the worse. And eventually, later that day, her daughter passed away. But why do we judge like that? Why do we have to think on the negative? Why can't we just say it must be something terribly important and leave it at that? Instead of saying, oh, how terrible for somebody to answer their phone in church. How terrible for somebody to sleep in the back of the church or to fall asleep even in a pew. I'm sure we've had people snoring, in the same row we're in. That happens. But let's stop thinking negatively. Think positive and let it go. And don't let any of this disturb your inner peace. A book that covers this, another book, An Introduction to the Devout Life, from Francis de Sales. It goes into how we really should think and act, even in times where we know things aren't right. Like if you're in a group of people that all of a sudden start gossiping, instead of putting up with it or taking part in the gossip, just kindly excuse yourself. That's one of the lessons in this book. And I'll leave you with a quote from the book, or a line from the book. We accuse our neighbors in little things, but we excuse ourselves in great things. We are ready to complain of our neighbor, but we would have no one complain about us. So take heart, my dear friends, and let's be careful how we come to conclusions about people in our everyday lives. A lot of times if somebody's mean-spirited or nasty, we tend to get nasty back. I try to think that maybe they're just having a bad day. Maybe they're going through problems at home, and that does affect people at work. So let's be more self-conscious about how we think, especially in church and in our lives when things come to us that are obviously against what we normally would think would be right and just. I've always said that God just does not make us virtuous. He sends us opportunities to practice virtues. And it's how we respond. It's when somebody disrupts our inner peace that we become impatient. And it's at those times we should practice patience. God bless everybody. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Friday. And I hope to see you again tomorrow. God bless.